Welcome back to another episode of Out Loud Geek, where we discuss news and views about pop culture, science fiction, fantasy, food, cooking, the outdoors, and more. Some potentially very big entertainment news was released last week. Supposedly, after being in charge of Lucasfilm for more than 12 years and essentially running it into the ground,
Power 1, Power 2, the power of many.
It's been reported that Kathleen Kennedy is planning to exit Lucasfilm by the end of the year. Now, for those of you who have watched my channel for a long time, you will undoubtedly know that I would love nothing more than for this news to be 100% true, and maybe it is, but I'm also very skeptical about this. Plus, we have to bear one very important thing in mind that I reported 2 years ago, which is also something that many other influencers said before I did. Star Wars, the franchise, is dead. It was killed by Lucasfilm president Kathleen Kennedy because she was only interested in pushing her personal radical feminist agenda, which later came to incorporate full-on woke identity politics, as exemplified by the Disney Plus show The Acolyte, which was created by Harvey Weinstein's former personal assistant, Leslie Headland. Not that many people even watched The Acolyte, but then even fewer tuned in to watch the more recent Star Wars show on Disney Plus, Skeleton Crew. And the viewership was so low for Skeleton Crew that not one episode ever made it even once into Nielsen's weekly list of top 10 most viewed original shows for any week that a new episode premiered. Why? Because nobody cared. The Star Wars franchise is dead, and by dead, what I mean is that it is incapable of sustaining itself financially.
Yes.
Too many normies and longtime Star Wars fans have simply given up on the franchise and no longer care about it. And that began as soon as Kathleen Kennedy decided to co-opt the Star Wars franchise to push her radical feminist agenda over and above good storytelling. She even deliberately had people like Ruan Johnson and Jar Jar Abrams retcon major elements of George Lucas's narratives that established the Star Wars franchise nearly 50 years ago. And why was that? Because Kathleen Kennedy has made it completely clear that she hates and despises men, and that hatred is common in people who have fully absorbed the radical feminist agenda that came into being in the 1960s, which is when Kathleen Kennedy grew up. But going back to the original topic of this video, various people over the years have claimed that Kathleen Kennedy is going to leave Lucasfilm, but then it never happened. So let's take a look at this article from Forbes, which in my own opinion is the least biased as compared to what I read in the trades. But before proceeding, if you're enjoying this video, please consider pressing the like button, and if you'd like to see more of my content, I hope you'll consider subscribing to my channel. And I want to convey my deepest thanks and appreciation to everyone who has subscribed. I believe you'll see why I liked this particular article from Forbes. Kathleen Kennedy reportedly leaving Lucasfilm, but can new leadership save Star Wars? Well, I can answer that question rather easily. No, it can't. It's too late to save Star Wars because too much damage has already been done. I truly do not believe that anyone could revitalize the Star Wars franchise and regain the fans' trust after more than 12 years of abuse from Kathleen Kennedy. But let's take a look at the article. One of the most controversial figures in modern Star Wars could be bowing out by the end of 2025, according to a new report. According to the report from Puck, a source with knowledge of Kennedy's plans says she intends to retire once her current contract ends, though another anonymous source rebuked these claims as, quote, pure speculation, unquote. Like I said, I don't trust these reports. Kennedy joined Lucasfilm in 2012, co-chairing the company alongside George Lucas, and became president when Disney acquired the company for $4 billion shortly thereafter. Her tenure has been a mixed success. I call it an unmitigated disaster. Kennedy's accomplishments include the excellent Disney Plus live-action Star Wars shows The Mandalorian and Andor, and some big box office wins, but the bigger picture has been one of disarray, as Star Wars slides further and further into cultural and commercial irrelevance. And that was brilliantly stated. The last two Disney Plus Star Wars series were unmitigated failures. Let me repeat that line because it's just too good not to say it twice. The last two Disney Plus Star Wars series were unmitigated failures. Both The Acolyte and Skeleton Crew had the worst viewership numbers of the entire franchise. And I have said that before, folks. While other Star Wars Disney Plus offerings were more successful, it's hard to look at Obi-Wan or The Book of Boba Fett as anything but lackluster TV shows that failed to capture the magic and imagination of the Star Wars legacy. Disney lost its magic once it adopted woke identity politics as its credo. Meanwhile, the House of Mouse has struggled to find lasting success on the big screen, with what ought to have been a slam dunk for Disney rivaling its success with the MCU. While the sequel trilogy saw big box office numbers, The Force Awakens remains the top-grossing film in US box office history at $936 million domestic, $2 billion globally. It also managed to divide the fan base. The fact that a coherent story and direction for the three sequel movies wasn't conceived prior to filming remains one of modern cinema's most egregious unforced errors. Well, I wouldn't call it unforced. I call it Kathleen Kennedy's lack of creativity combined with her emphasis on radical feminism over good storytelling. Both Solo: A Star Wars Story and Indiana Jones and the Dildo of Destruction were huge box office failures. Solo was the first Star Wars film to actually lose money. It's been over 5 years since the release of The Rise of Palpatine, which also lost money, and we have yet to see another Star Wars film hit theaters, though many projects have been announced. Like around 14 in total. Some of these remain on the table from directors like James Mangold and Taika Waititi, while others from Patty Jenkins, Ruan Johnson, and the creators of Game of Thrones, David Benioff and D.B. Weiss, will never see the light of day. Probably not, but you never know in the micromanaged world of Kathleen Kennedy. If she does retire, Kennedy leaves behind a mixed legacy at best. That's in keeping with Lucasfilm tradition. Lucas himself struggled to make use of the Star Wars brand after the original trilogy. The prequels were commercially successful, but for many fans, myself included, they were a massive disappointment. Worse, Lucas's edits to the original trilogy have left them all but unwatchable. Whether Star Wars will ever bounce back as the cultural powerhouse it once was remains a giant question mark. Not to me. Only one film in a galaxy far, far away has anything like a release window, with The Mandalorian and Grogu from director Jon Favreau set to hit theaters in 2026. I'd love to see Disney and Lucasfilm right the Star Wars ship, but at this point it's impossible to say whether even a change in leadership could bring back old fans, let alone win over a younger generation in any meaningful way. He finishes the article thinking that the second season of Andor may be good, which it might be, but I doubt it will get many people watching it. But what do you think? Do you think that Kathleen Kennedy is actually going to leave at the end of the year? If she does, do you think Star Wars can be saved? Please let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching today, and a huge thanks to each and every one of you who has subscribed to support this channel. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, X, and Blue Sky by clicking on the links in the description. Until next time, this is Out Loud Geek.